What happens when all your plans fall apart because of circumstances unfolding in the world? What do you do next? What could you do? That's what we're going to be looking at in this episode of the New Music Industry Podcast.
You're listening to the New Music Industry with David Andrew Weeb.
Today I am passing the mic with Music You're Missing, Breandan Jeannetti. How are you today, Breandan?
I'm doing wonderful. We had a nice pre-chat show about my crazy dogs and their constant crying. But beyond that, I'm doing okay. How are you?
I'm doing great. And as far as dogs go, I haven't owned any dogs, but it seems like wherever I live, there's always a dog nearby. So I've had all the fun and none of the responsibility. That's been pretty great.
Oh, I'm jealous.
Yeah. So in lieu of introducing your podcast, I would love for you to share what made you go, we've got to start a podcast. I get that it's a powerful channel for connecting with an audience, but it can also be a really challenging one to grow.
Definitely. I think I oftentimes forget that the brand was founded from a podcast because it really did start a while ago. For those that might not be familiar with Music You're Missing, we work with independent artists. We highlight them on the podcast. We interview them. Yeah. Then we put them on a Spotify playlist, and then we do like a bunch of social content with them. And of course, if they're ever in town, we'd love to have them play up for us or head to one of their shows. But really, it all started when I was in college, and it was just a passion project. At the time, I was working at iHeartRadio and Sony Music. So I was working like on radio things as well as the artist side of things. And my end goal at the time was to be an on-air radio personality. And there's no you can't entry level on-air radio personality. Like you really have to do things yourself. So I said, you know what, this is the perfect opportunity for me to combine my skill sets. Let's start a podcast where I interview artists. Since I am connected with some through Sony, and it ended up taking off really quickly. We were just so lucky to be I think my very first episode got front paged on Apple Podcasts. Meanwhile, I'm in school 2 hours away from the actual studio that I technically wasn't even allowed to use in the iHeart studio. And yeah, that is when it really started. Eventually, my co-host and I had to go our separate ways just because we both were in the industry. I signed a radio contract and had to stop my podcast. But then our dear friend COVID came along, and I was quickly let go of my job. And my friend and I, her name is Devin, she was out on tour when COVID hit for Live Nation. And we were just like, bro, this is not going to last 2 weeks. This is going to be a very long thing. And regardless of not having a job, this a huge sense of our personalities is music and working in music. I was so lost. So we were like, what can we do to get back into things? And it originally was, we were thinking of booking artists, which in hindsight is hilarious because you can't book artists if there's no venues open. Mm-hmm. But we looked at each other randomly one day and we were like, what if we restarted the podcast you had? That you still have an audience from it. Let's do it. And that is essentially how it started.
People sometimes say I have a radio voice. Never sure whether to take that as a compliment. Are you saying I'm ugly?
No, exactly. I used to run with that all the time. I used to love telling people that I had a face for radio.
But where you're at now must be validating, right? Because you're actually, in a way, you're kind of breaking artists or helping them get more exposure.
Yeah, this is honestly, I think specifically right now, we're in a moment where this is the most validated and successful I've ever felt. And it's really weird to say that because I'm so used to no one caring. And now all of a sudden everyone cares. And I'm just really, it is extremely validating. And I think I was actually talking about this. I did a TikTok live last night and I was talking to an artist and they were saying that they get insecure about, wanting validation and how they want to love their art without the validation. But I've got to be honest, it's human nature to want to feel validated. And when you finally get it, it is amazing. And it really does, push you to work harder. So I do. Yes, I feel very validated.
I relate to that very deeply. I just came off of a call with my coach and he was just sharing with me. He didn't know that I had 5 books, right? And I guess maybe a lot of people don't. So I try to make a point to mention that on the podcast. I'm a commitment first guy, ego second, right? Mm-hmm. I'm humble. I don't brag about things I do, but it's so important to share. Otherwise, people don't get to enjoy what you've created. And I'm sure it's kind of been the same for you on your podcasting journey, just making sure that, like, yeah, there's only so many channels and there's only so much time and money and effort that can go into it, but making sure that your message is actually gotten.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Also, 5 books. Woo. How long when did you first start writing?
So I must have started around 2012 or 2013 ish. We were working with a new music industry startup called Tune City. I was actually an investor and contractor with the company. So I was in charge of blogging 3 times a week. And out of the ashes of that, so to speak, came this opportunity to put together a book. And I scrapped the first draft because it was turning into this encyclopedia of personal development and music, as many people do, it turns out. They scrapped their first draft and just wrote something that was completely authentic to me and what I understood and what I knew about my experience in the music industry, as well as emerging trends in social media and things like that. So the first book came out in 2015, the new music industry book. And now this is the new music industry podcast, right? So when people see that there's a blip on the radar, maybe they're looking at Ahrefs or some SEO tool, and they see a blip for the new music industry, they need to realize that it's actually because I have a book and a podcast by that name. And we've been going for 6 years.
Wow. Congrats. I mean, good for you for, having the ability to scrap the first project. That is something that I struggle with. Like, you put in so much work, and if it's done, it's like, all right, well, it's done. Might as well put it out. But yeah, no, to really kind of hone your craft, and sorry, you can probably hear my dogs barking, to really hone your craft and put something that you're confident out is amazing.
Yeah. Well, thank you for that acknowledgement. And I don't want to step over that, but I do need to get the next question.
Yeah, of course.
So you've grown quite a following for Music You're Missing. What do you attribute your success to?
Honestly, I think I'm just like our listeners. Like I said, this didn't start with the intention of being my full-time job. It started very much so because I really liked music, and I just felt like, I guess, we can call it a market. I wasn't thinking like it was a market at the time, but there's just a market of people who love music and their artists get no attention. And it's so fun to talk to these people, and they put me on to so many good songs. So I think that's really like why people are catching on, because it's finally a space for them that isn't curated by the man. It's curated by this man who's just one of them.
You're right. It is a bizarre space like that. And I think maybe something people don't know, that in terms of really production, it's about an equal playing field between independent and signed artists now. There might be a slight gap in like, okay, we got the world's best mastering engineer, we got the world's best songwriters and so forth. But in terms of what we can do now, even with like, I love some of the automated mastering tools. I know that's probably a contentious issue for some people, but it's like they really do work, and they really do keep getting better,
Absolutely. The playing field is so leveled now. So it's amazing because it's leveled, but it's really the thing that, makes someone be successful is like the marketing behind it. So to be able to at least help and push someone who sounds like they should be, on the charts is pretty a cool thing.
Yeah, when I interviewed Dirk Sivers years ago from CD Baby, he shared with me that marketing wasn't ever going to go out of style in the music industry. So I focused on that business mindset and the marketing of music.
Absolutely.
What are your best tips for new podcasters or even longtime podcasters that have been at this a while but haven't found their stride? Are there specific things they could be doing to grow their audience?
Yeah, I mean, I think really just kind of finding your niche and people that actually relate to your podcast is huge. I find a lot of people, I'm in a lot of like be a guest or, podcast collaboration group chats, and someone will post and they'll be like, I'm a singer, or like I, work in one industry, and someone in a completely different industry is like, oh, why don't you come on my podcast? And it's like, that's not going to create an episode in which there's going to be like a conversation that, one, makes sense, and two, will captivate a listener. But also I think just going back to finding your niche, everyone can have a podcast, but if you're actually trying to, make it a thing, why? Like, why? I'm going to go back to one time I actually was working at Live Nation, and my boss, I told him I had a podcast, and he was like, well, what do you do? And I was like, I interview artists. And he's like, well, why do people care that you interview artists?
Right.
And I was like, oh, yeah, okay, wow. That was a good point. So it's like, why? Like, why are you doing what you're doing? Who are you? Like, who are you to tell me what you're telling me? It's got, at least for how I approach things, like kind of work on your branding first, and then your podcast second almost.
Yeah, I had friends who basically said to me, so you're going to write a book and you're going to put it out, and then what? Are people going to buy it? and naively I said yes. But at the same time, I was familiar with, I could put together a book launch performance of sorts, which I did with local musicians, and that went pretty good. And I was able to hand out, it was sort of an invitation card, not even a book, but here's where you can go and get it. Here's the QR code, etc. And beyond that, just with the digital marketing savvy that I had, the new music industry, there aren't too many books, from having heard from various authors, even like John Maxwell, who say have legs, but the new music industry continues to kind of sell, whether it's in or out of season. So not huge numbers, but hundreds of books have been sold with the new music industry. And yeah, it continues to hold up. So it was a great experiment in just discovering like what's going to work, what's something that people actually want.
Yeah. And in addition to that, it's like, do you actually want to talk about what you're talking about? Like finding a happy medium of this will both please myself and my audience. Yeah.
And the other thing that I really relate to what you said was, branding, it can sort of be a game of internal, external. And if you focus too much on the external of here are my colors, here's my font, here's my logo, it actually ends up being a superficial thing that makes no difference to the audience, or not as much of a difference. But if you focus on the internal as well, and have that drive every other decision, so like impact, difference, your purpose, what you want to do in the world, then when that drives your decisions, everything gets so much easier.
Absolutely. And another thing about branding isn't just, slapping your logo on something. And something that I've learned recently is, and the thing about branding is it always made me insecure, because I'm like, am I being fake right now? But now that my podcast is literally an extension of myself. So when I branding can be as little as I'm at a concert and I take a picture and I share it. And now people have further associated me with music. And maybe in the caption, I say, oh, this is a new artist, like really love him or whatever. Like that is really beneficial, because now my followers know me as the music guy again.
Kind of like on Instagram, you can create those little stories, categories for your stories. I guess it's the same thing on a blog, right? You can create categories for different interests. As long as you continually show up in those areas, people kind of get a sense of what you're about and create that association. So I've no doubt you've learned a lot from the artists you've interviewed. What's something you discovered recently that was kind of surprising or just has stuck with you?
Ooh, okay. This is actually a great question. Thank you. I think sometimes I forget I don't know all the answers. So I see things often. So TikTok is huge for artists right now. And a lot of the time it is fabricated. So artists will put these stories up and be like, my label doesn't want me to put this track out. Like, screw my label. Let's, if this gets to 10,000 pre-saves, I'll put it out on my own. I don't care about my label. So in my mind, I'm like, okay, classic marketing scheme. Like, that is not real. And, I'm sure sometimes it's not, but I was actually talking to this artist yesterday. His name is Justice Bennett. And he had a very similar situation in which he put out a track on TikTok. It got like 20 million listens when he dropped it. And his manager was so mad. And it was not a joke. He was genuinely mad. And then he explained it to me, and it made sense, because they were working with the track before it. The track I'm talking about now that blew up was called Bad Day. And before it, they had a track called Real Life Sucks that was getting pushed out to radio. So that was having a moment. And if another track comes up, then it's like, you really need to kind of split your resources. You can't do that. Like, it doesn't matter if so many people want to listen to it. You kind of need to be organized when you're working with different teams and such. So that was just interesting to hear, because, it's so easy to think those things as fake or whatever, but that was genuinely real. And it was just a cool thing that I learned, that, there is some authenticity left on social media.
I have a friend who's building an app right now, and we kind of went through different scenarios. And I was kind of sharing with him, are you actually prepared to have 10 million downloads tomorrow and everybody, messing around with your app? And he's like, no, that would be bad. And I'm like, exactly. So the
Mhm.
same thing can happen as an artist. Are you actually prepared to have 20 million, 30 million streams tomorrow? And the answer for a lot of artists is going to be like, no way.
Yeah.
We can't handle the merch sales. We can't handle the web traffic. People aren't totally present to that. So it's like breakthrough success can be amazing, but then you also have to scale and catch up real quickly, or else you lose some of that too.
Yeah, that's an amazing point. There was a comment on one of the videos too. He said like, if it gets X amount of pre-saves, I'll drop it in 2 weeks or something. And someone commented, and they were like, "You're wasting so much of this hype. Like you need to drop it tomorrow." And going back to your point, like that's just not how it works. You need to be able to have to be able to deal with what happens when people like mass amount of people do it, like, or stream your track, because like you said, if they are buying merch and your merch site crashes because you're using like some knockoff website, you're missing out on sales, like you're missing out on revenue, and you might get the streams, but those streams don't equate to anything other than streams.
You mentioned TikTok. Why is that a valuable thing for artists or podcasters or entrepreneurs? Is it really worthwhile?
Oh my gosh, yes. I think it really depends on your demographic though. I do see some people try to use TikTok, and it just kind of doesn't really make sense because TikTok has really created a culture. And honestly, I do really like it because there's like a sense of unity there. Like we all kind of talk in the same lingo, and we laugh, we have very similar humor. And I don't see a lot of like fighting as much as you see on other social media like Twitter. And it's more lighthearted, which I think is great. And for me, at least, it has helped me substantially. I've had many TikToks go viral, and that directly equates to plays on my podcast, new followers on my playlist. And the other day I made a TikTok about my merch, and I had a funny shirt. People loved it and people bought it, and we sold out. So it really does have the power to attract the right people. You can target directly to like the correct audience, but also it's really fun too.
So since you really love promoting other artists and helping them get more attention on their music, name a few artists that you've interviewed or you're listening to right now, or people you just think should have more exposure.
Oh my gosh, there's this artist called Stephen Day who I interviewed. This is a funny story actually. His management reached out to us to interview him. And typically I'm like pretty, like I like to kind of control who comes on the show, who's on the playlist, so that it's very authentic to the brand. And I started listening to his music. I was like, okay, this is good. Let's get him on the show. Like I feel like I'll grow to like him. I interviewed him. It was great. And then I really started to dig into his catalog. And I was like, oh my God, I think this might be my new favorite artist. And then he recently dropped a new album called The Shapes I'm In. And it is 100% hands down my album of the year. I actually went to his show in Boston like 2 weeks ago, and I got to meet him afterwards. And it was a very like full circle moment too. It was the first time I ever got to actually meet a Music You're Missing artist in person. And it just so happened that it was my favorite, at least sonically, artist. It was a great experience, and his music, there's specifically his track Standing Was Flying, is just like so beautifully done and transcends so many genres and demographics. I am very confident there's more success in his future.
Since I never get to talk about the music that I love, maybe I'll just join in and chime in with a few of my favorites. B apostrophe Z, the Bees. Not too many people have heard of them. One of the number
Saving
one
them right now.
Yeah. One of the number one selling artists of all time. They're J-Rock, and they have 49 number one consecutive singles.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. And it's amazing that people don't know. Winger. So they got written off as a stoner surfer hair metal band.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. It turns out Kip Winger is the real deal. He's a composer. He knows his way around music like nobody in hard rock. And the band's done amazing things with Reb Beach, who also plays for Whitesnake. Harem Scarum, amazing melodic rock band from Toronto. I've been following them all along. I've even shared updates from them. So I guess anybody that knows me well isn't going to be a stranger to that one. And there's a bunch of others I've been listening to lately, but those are a few that would love to highlight.
Have you ever got to meet any of them or any of your favorite artists?
Well, I did get to interview Pete Lesperance from Harum Scarum, so that was really great. On to experts that I've gotten to interview would be Derek Sivers and Tommy Tallarico, North America's most prolific video game composer. Pete Lesperance, Riley Armstrong at the time was kind of a big hero of mine. James Schramko, who's also been a business coach of mine for many years and mentor. So, those are just a few. We've had Rich Younglord Farson on the podcast too. Oh, cool. And we've seemed to have even more interest from industry now, which is kind of cool too. And we'll see. My perspective on industry guests is they really have sort of a perspective on things, and they're not willing to deviate outside of a box they were given to talk about. Yeah. And that's disappointing for me as a podcaster. Right? Yeah, I want the real story, and don't talk about, what this narrow box you were given from your PR company. You could say this or not say this. I'm sure you're familiar with that too.
Oh yeah.
It could still help your podcast. So there is that.
Oh, definitely. Are you still as cool, calm, and collected when you talk to one of your favorite artists?
Yes. But at first, when I was getting started, everything caused me a lot of anxiety. Performing, not for the first time, but for the second time, we were going to go up on a stage in a college campus. And the whole day I spent anxious and nervous. I couldn't believe it. Before Derek Sivers, or Tommy Tallarico was pretty much a wreck. But once I got talking with them, they're such great guys, and they have such great things to say too.
Yeah, once you get over that initial fear hump, I literally get so nervous about everything, but specifically, even though it's my job, talking to artists, we have our first in studio interview, and it's with one of the biggest artists we've interviewed, and I'm so nervous for it. It's totally affecting my whole week, but like you said, eventually it's just fine, and you're in it, and there's really nothing you can do.
Exactly, you do get used to it.
Yeah.
What's the next big step for music you're missing? Do you have any big future plans you can share?
Yeah, it's funny because I think on paper it might be easy to look at us and be like, oh, okay, they're just a music blog. But behind the scenes, we have incredible partnerships and sponsorships lined up. Right now, we're sponsoring a entire music festival that has 5,000 people in attendance, and I'm interviewing all of the artists. I'm doing social promotions with a bunch of the artists. We have a merch stand. We have all that stuff, and that's coming in 2 weeks. I just actually got hundreds of promotional items in the mail today, and it literally almost made me cry because it was just really surreal to see my brand come to life on where I started in promo. And then I actually just got off the phone with I won't say the actual company. I can tell you. Well, I don't want to make you edit, but with the media company about they reached out and they were just hey, let's talk. We have similar synergy they use. And I said, okay, yeah, let's definitely do that. And it was one of the best calls I think I've ever had. I've never been that confident on a call before. As I said, I'm nervous about everything. So yeah. And then in addition to that, we have our biggest artists lined up for this month. We're finally doing in-studio guests. We have a bunch of artists that we've interviewed in the past also coming to Boston. So I'm so busy right now, and I'm literally couldn't be happier. I'm very excited.
Yeah, and that's an example of things going well. What it reminded me was an example of things that didn't go well a while back.
Oh, no.
I had a PR company reach out to me a while back to book their own executives or employees that were part of the company. So they did 2 people simultaneously. And then one was an accept and one was a decline. And I said, okay, I'll prepare for the accept. And then at the last minute, there was a switcheroo. And I was like, I'm not prepared to interview so-and-so. I was prepared to interview this guy. And then they were like, oh, but we're a decline. So then after the fact, they declined the interview after the time has already passed. That's just the tackiest thing a PR company could do.
Literally so inconsiderate. That's also bad PR for your own PR company. How ironic.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm like, if that's how you run your PR company, I don't know how legit you are. Or
yeah,
if you're,
no, absolutely.
How you're doing it with your clients or any of that. Yeah. So I'll like to spend the last few questions basically developing your character and teasing out additional insights that could be useful to the listener. Number one is, what's the last YouTube video you watched?
Okay, that's funny. I actually YouTube common questions that you get asked on a podcast, so that I could prepare for this podcast.
That's
and
good.
I paused it when they asked, and I would talk to myself. And then the one before that, it was for the call that I had previously, and I googled common questions that you talk on like that you get asked on a networking call. So I YouTube strategically.
Gotcha. That's awesome. And it was a very Tim Ferriss-esque question. I can't remember what it was he asked. It was something similar. And I was like, oh, that could actually be interesting to reveal the character of the guest.
That is a great question. It explains without explaining how a person is.
Exactly. What is your daily routine like?
Ooh, that's a great question. I definitely do yoga every day. And when I am not in a routine of doing yoga every day, I am not my best self. It literally elevates me, and I am like a superhuman. I definitely drink a lot of coffee every day. And I do a lot of work from home. I work on my computer pretty much all day, and then I go to the gym, and then I do some work at the gym, and then that it's not fun. I just started recently to hang out with my friends more on the weekdays. And then weekends, I absolutely try to keep my weekends clear. I have a lot of fun on the weekends.
I'm a big fan of hot yoga too. Of course, that's been pretty much null and void for the last 20 months or whatever it's been. So
I know there was so much to worry about when COVID got announced, and believe me, like I worried about it and understood. But when I found out hot yoga was gone, I was like, oh my God, this is going to affect my mental health so much. But I'm happy to say it's back, and I'm thriving.
What's the greatest challenge you feel you've overcome on your journey?
I definitely think when I got let go from radio, because I really lucked out of college. I was 22 and I was in, a huge market, Boston, and I ended up going on the morning show. So like I really had great opportunities. And then when I got cut and then COVID happened, like nothing, there was virtually no opportunity. And even recently, I was still trying to get back into some things, and there was just no opportunity. And then I obviously just kind of made my own opportunity. And I feel like that really has taught me a lot about anytime I'm presented with a challenge to be creative, and you can overcome it. And the first step is let's figure out how.
Yeah, COVID's a really interesting situation. I will admit that it didn't affect my lifestyle a whole lot. It definitely prevented me from going and doing things that I would normally do, such as I'm a foodie, so I love going to various restaurants. But I do know that so many people were impacted and had to make tough decisions through that. So, I have to acknowledge that for sure.
Yeah. I also did, in fact, so I got cut from radio and I moved to Montana, because I knew at the time COVID didn't exist in Montana, and I didn't know how rapidly spread it was going to be. So I was like, this is a perfect opportunity. I finally have come. Let's go to Montana. This is me making the most of it. Obviously, COVID spread very quickly, and I had to come home eventually, but at least I got that experience of living in Montana for, I think 5 weeks. And it was literally one of the best experiences of my life.
Montana, if I'm not mistaken, it's just south of Alberta, where I used to live. So I think I've been to Idaho. I know that. I don't think I've been to Montana, but would love to visit. There's a lot of great nature and things.
Oh, it's incredible there.
What's the greatest victory you feel you've experienced?
Great question. I don't think that I've had one solid, huge victory. I think anytime you're a creator or a creative even, it's a bunch of small successes, because, with small successes comes opportunity for more success, and you'll never be fulfilled. So I think just being able to say that, I'm doing what I love rather, and I'm happy at the same time, I think is my favorite success overall.
Yeah, I felt that, because I think it's really human nature to continually go, am I good enough? And it really starts with our parents and our teachers and our upbringing and all that. And that's something that can torment you well beyond adulthood, I'm sure. Feeling like you're good enough. And after 5 books and 30 songs released and everything else that's gone on, I still don't know if I'm good enough, right? I still have that going on. It really is just comes down to like distinguishing it and knowing what's going on so that you can actually take actions or be in conversation or do something other than what you would normally do to try to maybe drown it out or, take it in an unhealthy direction.
Definitely. I think self-acceptance is, in short, basically what I was getting at. Like, you spend so much of your time criticizing yourself, and I still do, but for different things, and definitely not as intensely. So like finding a relationship within yourself to be happy about any little accomplishments, and not put so much pressure on yourself to, do the biggest of things, I think is my overall arching success.
Are there any books that have helped you on your journey?
Yes. that was a quick yes. I feel like it's going to be cheesy because I do see it all the time now. And I thought it was like really special to me, but Atomic Habits, I think it's by James Clear.
James Clear sounds right.
Yeah. I actually read that in Montana, and it was July, like something, and it was snowing, and I read it on a mountaintop in the middle of July alone, like my first day ever going to Montana. And I was like, wow, this is a core memory, one, and two, I have learned so much from this. And it was also at the time when I was like doing yoga a lot, and recently I couldn't do it, so it was kind of like a reintroduction to that Zen in a new form. And yeah, that really has stuck with me a lot.
Well, we've packed a lot in a short amount of time, which seems to be my woe lately. So thanks for your time and generosity, Breandan. Is there anything else I should have asked?
Gosh, no, you did an amazing job. I'm sorry I'm so long-winded, but this was so fun. I really do appreciate you giving me an opportunity to chat with you, and I love learning more about you as well.
Yeah, not at all. I think it's my job to let the guests talk, and I'll chime in absolutely because it is my podcast, but I love to hear what's being shared. So yeah, I think we've created a lot of value. And if you happen to be listening and not subscribed yet, why not? Make sure you're subscribed to the show. And if you're watching this on YouTube, same deal. Like, comment, subscribe, and we'd love to hear from you.
Thank you so much. I appreciate your time.
All right, thanks.
So if you enjoyed this episode of the New Music Industry Podcast, I want to invite you to pick up a copy of the Music Entrepreneur Code. If you're struggling to adapt in pandemic times, this book will help point you in the right direction. Get your copy at musicentrepreneur.hq.com/code. This has been episode 250 of the New Music Industry Podcast. Wow. Now we're really starting to feel like a senior podcast. I am David Andrew Weeb, and I look forward to seeing you on the stages of the world. Thank you for listening. Music in this episode was brought to you by Brian Young. Wherever you're listening to this right now, please consider leaving a 5-star review and comment to help us get the word out about the podcast.